A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Imagine a single ship, longer than the Empire State Building is tall, wedged sideways across one of the world's most critical waterways. That's not a hypothetical. That's exactly what happened 5 years ago this month. And the ripple effects are still reshaping how we think about global supply chain resilience.
It was a 400-meter-long lesson in fragility. Welcome to my weird prompts.
So I was thinking about time capsules this morning. You know how people bury them with, like, a newspaper and a mixtape and a letter to their future self?
Sure, the classic message to the future idea. A snapshot of a moment sealed away.
Right. But what if the time capsule wasn't something you buried on purpose? What if it was a 400-meter-long container ship that got wedged sideways in a canal and accidentally became a global lesson in fragility?
You're talking about the Ever Given. That's a brilliant way to frame it. It wasn't a curated collection of artifacts, it was a chaotic, accidental snapshot of our entire just-in-time world stuck in the mud.
I am indeed. Daniel's prompt this time is all about that moment in March 2021, when one big boat had a very bad day, and the entire world's supply chains collectively held their breath. It's a fascinating case study in single points of failure.
It really is. And you know, it's funny you brought up the time capsule idea, because today, in 2026, we're actually coming up on the 5-year anniversary of that incident. And the lessons from it feel more relevant than ever, especially when you look at what's been happening in the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz more recently. It's like we got a preview of systemic risk and then, well, we'll get to that.
Before we dive in, just a quick note that today's episode is powered by Xiaomi MiMo V2 Pro, which is doing the heavy lifting on the script generation side of things. Alright, Herman, set the stage for me. What actually happened with the Ever Given?
Okay, so on March 23, 2021, the container ship Ever Given, which is operated by Evergreen Marine, was making a routine northbound transit through the Suez Canal. It's a behemoth of a ship, 400 meters long, 59 meters wide. To put that in perspective, that's longer than the Empire State Building is tall. It was carrying over 18,000 20-foot equivalent units, or TEUs, of cargo. As it entered a particularly narrow, single-lane section of the canal near the city of Suez, it encountered high winds and a sandstorm. The ship lost the ability to steer effectively, and its bow swung into the eastern bank of the canal. Its stern then swung into the western bank, and just like that, it was stuck, diagonally, completely blocking the channel.
So it's not like it crashed into a wall. It more braced itself against both sides of the canal, like a giant 200,000-ton plug.
That's a perfect way to describe it. It created a dam of steel and cargo right across one of the planet's most critical arteries. And the geometry is key here. The canal at that point was only about 205 meters wide at the waterline. You have a ship that's 5 meters shy of 2 football fields in length trying to navigate a channel that's barely wider than the ship is long. When you add in the wind load from a sandstorm acting on all those stacked containers, which act like a giant sail, the forces become enormous. The ship's massive size, which is its economic advantage, becomes a huge liability in a constrained space. Think of it like trying to parallel park a skyscraper in a strong crosswind.
So, the very thing that makes it efficient for moving thousands of containers at once is what makes it a catastrophic blocker. The efficiency itself contains the seed of the failure.
Precisely. And this gets to the core of modern shipping economics. Over the past 2 decades, there's been this relentless drive toward ever larger vessels. The Ever Given is in the ultra-large container vessel class. The logic is simple. Bigger ships mean lower cost per container, better fuel efficiency, higher profit margins. But the infrastructure, The canals, the ports, the navigation channels hasn't scaled at the same pace. The Suez Canal has been widened and deepened multiple times, most recently in a major expansion completed in 2015, but it's still fundamentally a 19th century waterway trying to accommodate 21st century megaships. That mismatch is a latent vulnerability. It's like building a Formula One car but forcing it to race on a horse and buggy track.
Now that we've set the stage, let's dive into the technical details of how this happened. So the blockage happens. What's the immediate impact? I remember seeing the pictures, the excavator trying to dig out the bow. It looked almost comically small next to the ship, like a child's toy next to a mountain.
The visual was absolutely surreal, that lone excavator chipping away at the bank. But the operational reality was dead serious. The canal handles about 12% of all global trade. That includes roughly 30% of all global container traffic. And it's not just containers. About 8% of the world's liquefied natural gas and a significant portion of crude oil pass through there. When the Ever Given stopped, everything behind it stopped. Vessels began queuing at both the northern entrance near Port Said and the southern entrance at Suez. At the peak, there were over 400 ships waiting. That includes tankers, bulk carriers, container ships, all idling, burning fuel, missing schedules. The daily cost of that idle fleet alone was staggering.
And each one of those ships is a node in a supply chain. It's carrying components for a factory, or goods for a store shelf, or oil for a refinery. So the blockage isn't just a traffic jam in the canal, it's a traffic jam in the global economy. A traffic jam where every car is a critical delivery.
That's the cascading effect. The immediate cost was estimated at something like $9.6 billion per day in disrupted trade. But the real damage wasn't those 6 days of blockage. It was the weeks and months of ripple effects. Think about just-in-time manufacturing. A car has about 30,000 parts. If you're missing one specific wiring harness that's stuck on a ship in the queue, your entire assembly line shuts down. We saw that happen with companies like Volkswagen and Ford in Europe. Production delays, factories temporarily closing. And it's not just automotive. It's electronics, it's furniture, it's clothing. Everything that travels on a container ship.
Can you give a more specific example? Like what was actually on those ships that caused such headaches?
Oh, absolutely. Beyond the obvious finished goods, it was the unseen components. One that stuck with me was a shipment of specialized semiconductor chips for a European appliance manufacturer. They weren't the cutting-edge chips for phones, but older, specific models for controlling washing machine cycles. There were only 2 factories in the world that made them, both in Asia, and both relied on the Suez route. The delay caused a shortage that rippled through the white goods industry for a quarter. Or take something as mundane as coffee. A major European roaster had several containers of green coffee beans from East Africa on ships in that queue. The delay meant they had to air freight small batches at enormous cost to keep supermarket shelves stocked, or risk blending in lower quality beans from other sources, affecting taste. It's these hyper-specific dependencies that make the system so brittle.
So the 6-day event creates a months-long headache. It's not a delay, it's a system-wide recalibration.
It does. And the logistics industry had to scramble. Some ships made the decision to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. That adds about 2 weeks to a journey between Asia and Europe. It means more fuel, more crew costs, more CO2 emissions. It throws off all the carefully calculated port schedules and container availability. Insurance premiums spiked. The whole system, which is optimized for efficiency and predictability, was suddenly operating in a state of expensive uncertainty. You had containers in the wrong part of the world, ships out of position, crews facing extended voyages. It was a massive logistical puzzle with no clean solution.
It's like the global supply chain is a precision watch, and the Ever Given was a grain of sand that got jammed in the gears, and then the gears ground to a halt, and the watchmaker had to take the whole thing apart to fix it.
A very big grain of sand. And what's interesting is that this wasn't even the first time something like this happened, though it was by far the most dramatic. Back in 2020, there were temporary disruptions due to COVID-related port closures. And even before that, in 2016, a smaller container ship called the Ever Liberal ran aground in the canal and blocked it for about a day. But the scale of the Ever Given was orders of magnitude larger in its impact. It was a wake-up call that the system's efficiency had outpaced its resilience. It moved the conversation from, this is unlikely to, this is inevitable.
So let's dig into that. What specific vulnerabilities did this expose? You mentioned the ship size versus canal width. What else?
A few critical things. First, the canal's operational design. Large sections are still single lane with designated passing areas. So when one ship stops, everything stops. There's no easy bypass. It's a single track railway for global trade. Second, the concentration of traffic. When you have 12% of global trade funneled through one narrow channel, you've created a massive single point of failure. It's the maritime equivalent of having all your data on one server with no backup. Third, and this is more subtle, the opacity and complexity of modern supply chains. Many companies didn't even know if their cargo was on the Ever Given or on a ship stuck in the queue. They had to wait for shipping lines to provide manifests. The lack of real-time granular tracking was a huge problem.
That third point is wild. So a company might be waiting for a critical part, and they literally don't know if it's sitting in the Red Sea or if it never left the factory in Shenzhen. How is that possible in this day and age?
It was shockingly common. The tracking systems were often siloed. The shipping line knew where the ship was, but the cargo owner might only get updates at major milestones: departed origin port, arrived destination port. The container itself was often a black box. The incident really accelerated investment in supply chain visibility platforms and IoT tracking for containers. Now, 5 years later, real-time GPS tracking on high-value containers is much more common, but it was a direct lesson from the ever-given chaos.
Okay, so the ship gets freed on March 29th. After 6 days, the canal reopens. Crisis over, right?
If only. The freeing of the ship was just the starting gun for the next phase of disruption. Remember those 400 plus ships in the queue? They all needed to transit. The Canal Authority prioritized them, but it took days to clear the backlog. And then all those ships arrived at their destination ports in a compressed, unscheduled wave. Ports like Rotterdam, Felixstowe, Singapore, they operate on tight schedules with allocated berths, crane operators, truck appointments. A sudden surge of ships creates massive congestion at the ports. Containers get piled up. There aren't enough chassis to move them off the dock. It's a cascading failure that moves from the canal to the ports to the rail yards and warehouses. The port congestion lasted longer than the blockage itself.
How did they actually free it, by the way? I just have this image of that tiny excavator.
Oh, it was a monumental effort. That excavator was just the tip of the iceberg. They ended up deploying a fleet of dredgers to remove sand and mud from under the bow and stern. They had a team of naval architects and salvage experts running complex calculations on ballast water and tension. At one point, they had over a dozen tugboats pulling and pushing in a coordinated sequence, timed with the high tide. It was a massive round-the-clock operation involving Dutch and Japanese salvage firms. The fact that they did it in 6 days was actually a minor miracle of logistics and engineering. But the point is, the solution wasn't simple or quick. It was a Herculean task that highlighted how difficult it is to mitigate these failures once they occur.
So the blockage didn't just delay shipments, it created a pulse of congestion that rippled outward for weeks. A shockwave of inefficiency.
For months in some cases, the whole system had to absorb that pulse and then return to equilibrium. And it happened at a terrible time. Global supply chains were already strained from the pandemic. Inventories were low. Demand for consumer goods was high. The ever-given blockage was like throwing a boulder into a river that was already running at flood stage. It exacerbated existing shortages and delays. Some analysts estimated the total impact, including the lingering effects, was in the tens of billions of dollars. It wasn't just a cost, it was a tax on global recovery.
So it's not just an operational incident, it's an economic shock. A self-inflicted wound, in a way, born from our own system design.
It was a systemic shock, and it forced a lot of companies and governments to ask some hard questions. For companies, it was about supply chain design. The mantra for decades has been lean and efficient, minimal inventory, just-in-time delivery, single-source suppliers for critical components to get the best price. The Ever Given showed the dark side of that philosophy. When your single source is on a ship that's stuck, you have no buffer. We've seen a real shift since then toward what some call just-in-case strategies. Companies are diversifying suppliers, holding more safety stock, and nearshoring or friendshoring production to reduce dependence on long, fragile maritime routes.
Just in case. I like that. It's the opposite of lean. It's a bit chubby, but resilient. It's choosing to carry an umbrella even when the forecast is sunny.
It's a calculated trade-off. You pay more for inventory and potentially higher production costs, but you buy insurance against catastrophic disruption. For governments, it was about critical infrastructure. The Suez Canal is a massive revenue source for Egypt. After the blockage, the Suez Canal Authority fast-tracked plans to widen and deepen the southern section of the canal where the Ever Given got stuck. They've completed a lot of that work. The goal is to allow two-way traffic for larger vessels in more sections, reducing the single-lane bottleneck. They've also invested in more powerful tugs and better sandstorm forecasting.
So they're literally trying to make the canal more ship-proof, reinforcing the artery.
In a sense, yes, but you can only widen a canal so much. It's geographically and financially constrained. The deeper lesson is about system design. We've built a global economy that is incredibly optimized, but also incredibly interconnected and interdependent. A failure in one node, in this case, a single ship in a single canal, can propagate through the network in unpredictable ways. It's a classic complex systems problem. The optimists call it efficiency. The pessimists call it fragility.
It makes you wonder what other nodes are that fragile. We've talked about the Strait of Hormuz before on this show. The Strait of Malacca. The Turkish Straits. These are all choke points where a blockage, whether accidental or deliberate, could have similar or even greater effects.
And that's the geopolitical dimension. The Ever Given was an accident, but those choke points are also potential targets in a conflict. The recent Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, which have forced many vessels to reroute around Africa, are a deliberate exploitation of that same vulnerability. It's not a blockage by a grounded ship, it's a blockage by missile threat. The economic effect is similar. Longer transit times, higher costs. But the cause is geopolitical. So the Ever Given was a stress test that revealed weaknesses that adversaries could also exploit. It moved choke point risk from a theoretical logistics concern to a boardroom level strategic risk.
With the immediate crisis resolved, let's explore the long-term ripple effects across industries. So the practical takeaway for a business listening to this is what? Don't put all your eggs in one basket, even if that basket is the cheapest.
That's the core of it. Diversify your logistics routes. If you're shipping from Asia to Europe, know what the Cape of Good Hope option looks like and what it costs. Build relationships with multiple carriers. Invest in visibility, know where your stuff is. And critically, model your supply chain for disruption, not just for efficiency. Run scenarios. What happens if the Suez is closed for a week? A month? What's our plan B? The companies that weathered the Ever Given disruption best were often the ones that had already been doing this kind of stress testing. They had the chubby resilience built in.
And for smaller businesses who maybe can't afford to hold months of extra inventory or hire a team of logistics analysts, what's their lesson?
For them, it's about awareness and partnership. Know who your freight forwarder is and ask them tough questions. What are their contingency plans? Can they offer multi-carrier options? Consider slightly longer lead times as a buffer. Sometimes just understanding that a 3-week delay is a possibility, not a freak accident, can change how you plan your production or communicate with your customers. It's about building flexibility into your mindset, even if you can't build it into your balance sheet.
And for the rest of us, as consumers, I guess it's just an awareness that the price of that new laptop or the availability of that car model can be affected by a sandstorm in Egypt or a missile in Yemen. The world is smaller and more connected than we think. Our conveniences are built on a very complex, very physical foundation.
It is. And it's a reminder that the smooth functioning of global trade, which we take for granted, relies on a fragile network of physical infrastructure and geopolitical stability. The Ever Given was a vivid 6-day lesson in that fragility. 5 years on, with new tensions in the Red Sea and Hormuz, it's a lesson we're still learning. We built a world that runs on just in time, and we're slowly realizing we might need a little more just in case.
A 400-meter long time capsule, stuck in a canal, teaching us about complexity. Not a bad metaphor for a Monday. It's a message from our past selves to our future selves, saying, hey, maybe slow down and think about what could go wrong.
Not bad at all. It's a reminder that efficiency and resilience are often in tension, and finding the balance is the ongoing work.
Well, thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping us on track. And big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show.
If you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app helps us reach new listeners who might be curious about topics like global logistics and system fragility. It really does help.
This has been My Weird Prompts. I'm Corn.
And I'm Herman Poppleberry. Until next time.
Take care. This episode was produced using Xiaomi Mimo V2 Pro. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where all